The name of the game is like, you're just trying to uncover who is interested. And oftentimes people are curious about what an exit looks like.
One guy we bought from, in fact, it was the first guy we bought from, his wife told him, you better sell that business because we're going to go on a cruise for, I think it went on a cruise for 6 months or something.
How long have you been in the business? What does your business look like? As a full third-party manager? Do you own all the assets? Is it mobile home? Is it commercial? There's a lot of variations of property management.
Hire a great transaction attorney.
Do we like this business? 2, is it in the right market? Do we have the right local teams to integrate this? So this is when the fun starts, and this is when more people on our team get involved.
And this is where I get out.
Problem solving on overload. And so there's just a bunch of small things that are not ideal that you have to figure out how to work around.
So we look for specific sellers that are either retiring, there's sellers that are getting out of the business. Mm-hmm. There are sellers out there that want to stay involved, and we're just not the right buyer for them.
Yep.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Everest Property Management Show, where we dive deep into real-world strategies, lessons, and hard truths about scaling your property management business from 300 doors to 3,000 and beyond. I'm Matthew Whitaker, founder and CEO here at Everest, and today I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Gray Hall. Gray, as always, great to have you here.
Glad to be here. The office is a little sadder today with Spencer Sutton making his exit last week.
It is. We're, we sent him off with a huge parade. It had like elephants and, a lot of fireworks. But, I hate to say this, but he left before lunch, right before the end of the day.
And he did. He came in early because he didn't want anybody to see him carrying his big box.
I know,
being embarrassing. He didn't want that photo going around. So
yeah, I was a little pissed off that I didn't get a picture of him carrying his box out.
I did get the last picture, so I do have that to put up on the wall.
He was terrified of walking out of the office carrying a box.
He was. Yeah, glad to be here. Excited to talk through this today.
Yeah, this is a pretty cool topic. Today we're going to tackle one of the most powerful ways, I would say, to accelerate your growth in our industry, buying and selling property management companies. So whether you're a buyer looking to expand your footprint or a seller thinking about your well-deserved exit, we're going to talk about riding off into the sunset. And of course, we're going to go through our process. And I think for most people, this will be a game changer. So just to give some background of us, at Everest, we've closed over 30 transactions. So we do speak from a little bit of knowledge. Our transactions have come everything from a small portfolio. I think our smallest was 30 doors.
May have been less. 20. So it was a pretty small one.
All the way up to, let's say, 4,000 or 5,000 doors. So a national footprint company. So we've done all of them, and the other 28 are somewhere in between that. So I feel like we come from a standpoint of knowing a little bit about this subject.
Mainly because we made every mistake in the book. And
yes.
So we can help avoid some of those, and you get better and better and better at this. But we've made a bunch of mistakes and over the past 10 years doing a bunch of these acquisitions. And so, walking through what not to do as well as what to do.
Well, we're going to share some real stories, some things that we've done, some pitfalls that we've dove headfirst into. Mm-hmm. I always tell somebody, we've figured out 30 ways not to do it, and we'll probably figure out a 31st next time we do it. But we're going to help a lot of people, I think, avoid a lot of pain. If you're a buyer, on the seller side, we're just going to fill in a lot of gaps on, you only sell your business one time, maybe multiple, maybe you sell a couple companies, but having gone through this 30 times, just having some clarity on what the process is. All right, let's get it kicked off. The first thing is really all about, how do you identify deals? We called it step 1, initial outreach and prospecting. So Gray, we're actually having a lot of these conversations right now because we're looking to buy more companies. Mm-hmm. So talk about how we're thinking about prospecting.
I was thinking through all the deals that we've done. It's a relationship game. Like most things, I think you can have outbound targets and outbound strategies, and we've done more of that. But when you're in the industry and you're going to NARPM conferences and you've got a podcast, and I think as you start to show up to these events and you get some familiarity with people, that's where a lot of the deals have come from. You've been in the industry for 15 years. I think a lot of property management company owners are probably in a similar scenario. Most of the people I talk to have been in this for 5 or 10 years. And so it's a network game. So like NARPM has been a really good place. I think we've done a lot of deals through contacts at NARPM. But we also have outbound strategies. And so we've got lists of PMs and we're trying to add value and reaching out. The name of the game is like, you're just trying to uncover who is interested. And oftentimes people are curious about what an exit looks like. And so they're more than willing to have the conversation. Like you said, they only sell one time. And so relationships and networking and conferences have been huge. And then we also were trying to just get in front of people and find who is, wanting to have a conversation about what it looks like.
Yeah, I always say familiarity breeds trust. And before we ever moved to another market, I would say for a couple of years, spent time going to Atlanta NARPM, going to the Nashville NARPM. And I knew for us to get to our 25,000 house goal, we were going to have to move outside of Birmingham, right? You just can't manage 25,000 houses in Birmingham. Yeah. So started going to those NARPM conferences and building relationship, or really just luncheons and building relationships. And the cool thing was our first deal in Nashville actually came out of a relationship at a NARPM lunch. Actually 2 people called me with the same deal and we were able to connect with that seller and buy. That was our first business to buy outside of Birmingham.
And it's a pretty connected world because there are other people in NARPM that we've bought. I think the Little Rock deal was somebody who's really involved in NARPM. And so, yeah, that has been really good. You did it for like 2 or 3 years, I think, that you were driving up to Nashville
on a monthly basis.
On a monthly basis. So it takes a long time to get that familiarity with people. And oftentimes you don't call somebody, they're ready to sell, and you buy the business. Like oftentimes there's a 2 to 3 year tail. And so if you're looking to start buying these, like start early. And if you're a seller, like go ahead and have conversations. We'll get into this later, but trust is just a huge part of this and who you sell to. And I think it takes time to feel comfortable and kind of like develop that trust on both sides. And so, trust is just a massive factor, which is why we talk about this being a relationship game.
Let's lean in from the seller's perspective. My guess is a lot of these sellers are getting inundated with emails and phone calls. At least I know they were back in 2022.
Yeah.
Today, there's probably much less, but they still are getting consistently, whether it's groups like us, some of our competitors, or if it's private equity trying to get into the industry. How do you know like who to have a conversation with? Do you suggest they talk to everybody? Do you suggest they just talk to people that they've heard of?
Yeah, it's a good question. My dad runs a vacation management company, and every week he's telling me I'm getting 2 or 3 different emails. And so I hear it from his side, similar industry. And yeah, it depends on where you're at. I would say like developing a few small relationships. So have a few phone calls with people, but there are a lot of private equity groups and they're looking for, their foothold, or they don't have really experience in this. Like I would probably lean into experience. Now it probably sounds like I'm selling my own book here. So I'm aware of that, but groups that are familiar with the industry, groups that you have heard of before, asking around people. And so you probably can't take every phone call because that might be 1 or 2 a week. And so, yeah, probably groups that you've heard of, like asking around NARPM, asking around other property management companies, like who is buying. What would you say?
Well, I've had a number of these conversations too, and I feel like sometimes some groups are just looking for information. And so it's basically like them trying to spend 30 minutes or an hour just learning about the industry. And that, as an operator, your time is critically important, right? Like if you're on the phone with somebody that's never going to buy your business, that's just a huge waste of time that you could be servicing a client or leasing another house. And so I kind of lean towards you. Maybe you take a few of those calls just to like prove that what I'm saying is true. But I think overall, it depends on where you are in your journey. I think you hit a good spot. If you're actively trying to sell it, maybe it makes sense to spend more time with some of these tire kickers. But if you're not, maybe having 1 call a month is worth it. Just setting a kind of a cap on how many calls you have.
I would probably like have 5 phone calls to understand the process. Because I think what you'll learn and what we're trying to help do here is like, I think that they can ask questions of your business and it can make you think, hey, do I have my business set up where it's sellable? And I think you can also ask them questions. So I would go in with a list of questions. What's their experience? What are they looking for? What do they pay? I think you could learn a lot in 5 or 6 different conversations and then put pause on it and kind of go back to building. And when you're ready to sell, then you can go out. And so I think it's a really good thing to actually like think through what it would be like to sell, even if you're not ready. And even if that's 5 or 6 years down the road, and having a couple of those phone calls could be helpful.
I also think when you think about some of these private equity groups, you also need to realize who is calling you.
Mm-hmm.
It's never the partner that's the decision maker that's calling you. They have basically first and second year analysts that are picking up the phone and calling you. And it's almost like salespeople. They're trying to get the next call. And so I'm actually dealing with one now. I took the call, had a conversation with him, and his whole goal is to get to the VP. And so now he wants me to have a call with the VP. And so, I take a lot of these calls just because of our strategy. It's always nice to have some conversations. But I can tell you, you will burn a lot of calories talking to these private equity groups.
Because there might be like large aggregators like Everest, and there's a couple other ones. There's like small kind of independent searchers that you may get phone calls from. Some of these large groups may have an analyst, but they also outsource this to other groups. And so like their whole job is just finding businesses, and they're like a lead generator, and then they will kick you off. And then there's business brokers. And so there's a lot of different flavors of people that will be reaching out. And so like which bucket of those 5, maybe there's a few more, do they fit in, will like help you understand. Because if you're just talking to a lead aggregator, like they may not know exactly, how they might not have advice on like how to structure your business, and it might take 3 or 4 phone calls to get there. I think business brokers could be helpful, especially if they're focused on our industry. But if they have never sold anything in the PM industry, I don't know how valuable it would be if you're not immediately looking to sell.
There's definitely a lot of hands in the cookie jar when a transaction takes place, just because there's so much money paid out at closing. Thinking about it from if you're trying to buy, one of the things I think people undervalue is just looking in your market, building relationships in your market. One of the things we've seen in offices that have more than 600 homes is how much more profitable our offices that have more than 600 homes are versus 200. And so if I was getting started again, one of the first things I would do is try to just massively own Birmingham. I think we did an okay job at that, but I would actually even rather overpay for a market that I'm in already versus trying to expand to Nashville like we did. And so I'm curious, like, if you were a buyer, how should they think about going deep in their own market versus trying to expand into multiple markets?
Multiple markets is hard. And it's also really expensive. Let's say you had 500 units in a market and you had 200 units there. You don't have to duplicate yourself if you're running the business. You don't have to duplicate the field inspector. You don't have to duplicate a lot of positions. And so there's a lot less just like, OpEx or COGS, there's a lot less cost associated with setting that business up. But a new market is a new real estate license, a new broker, a new office. There's just a lot of costs that kind of come in there. I think you got to be pretty committed to that strategy. Now, I think a lot of buyers may do that because they say, I want to grow and I want to scale, but there's not enough businesses in my market today. So I think that's what drives people. And that can be a reality. But to your point of overpaying, you should look at, what's a pro forma P&L. So if I just bought this 200 units in another market versus adding those to my P&L, the math would show you that adding them in your market today is a lot more valuable. And I'm trying to think how like sellers could use it, but that's how I would think about it if I was going to do this again.
Yeah, and I would say if I'm a seller, maybe some of your best buyers are some of the people in your market, right?
Yeah.
And maybe they would pay more for it. I mean, when we think about markets that we're already in, strategic markets that we want to continue to grow to that 600 doors, we're a whole lot more likely to lean in on price. So if I was a seller, somebody that already has an office there versus somebody that's brand new, my guess is you would probably get a better price.
And they can move faster. That's when
That's
they know
true.
the market.
Hey, infrastructure's there.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Yeah, they can kind of set stuff up. What are your thoughts on Biz by Sell? You ever bought a business off there? Or any of these other business websites?
I've certainly had a bunch of conversations as a result of it. I want to say that that one of those 30 came from a website. I want to say that, but I'm not 100% certain. Look, who knows? We found a deal in California that we got really close on one time, fairly recently. So I don't think it's a bad place to list your business.
You probably have to sort, like if you list your business there, you're probably going to get a lot of tire kickers or people that might not be the best. So you may end up just spending a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And as a buyer, you got to sort through a lot of stuff. Because I think they know it's a marketplace. And so I think there are probably diamonds in the rough, like many kind of online marketplaces. I don't remember if we bought one off there.
It's interesting because there's so few, and I found this when I was buying and selling houses, there's so few serious buyers and serious sellers. Mm-hmm. You mentioned people that are just like trying to market the businesses, right? Like I'll go essentially get one under contract and try to market it to some private equity group. And so I think like getting through the noise and getting to somebody that has certainty to close, there's some real value in that, especially if you're thinking about things like retirement. The last thing you want to do is have a process that gets drug out for months and months and months. Your team finds out, and then all of a sudden things fall through.
Because going through, we'll get through it and you'll kind of understand it, but it's a lot of work to like sell a business and even think about. So when I think about all of this, like doing it as like efficiently as possible and with like certainty of close, we'll hit on like why, what you can look for later on. But it's one, like really important, but two, it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort away from the day-to-day of the business. So just like if you're selling a business, just be aware of that. That can suck up much time pretty quickly.
Just to kind of put a bow on this, I'm going to go through some things that we've done to try to generate, leads for PMs that want to sell. This podcast by itself is one, right? Mm-hmm. Our goal is to build trust so that people will reach out to us, and it's worked. I mean, frankly, people have reached out to us. It's funny how well, the way I explain it to people that are asking, it's, I've watched my pastor at church on essentially up on the screen for now almost 22 years. Mm-hmm. I've only met him twice, but I trust him because I see him every week, right? And so people that you hear their voice over and over again, and people that are transparent, you just build a lot of trust, and that's what we're trying to do here. We've also mailed out letters to people. A lot of people still have some old GK Houses letters.
Mm-hmm. We used to have parties, and we'd just all get together and we'd fold up letters
and lick stamps.
It was fun.
Stamp licking party. And we've also done cold call outreach. I wasn't that great at that. There was a big joke that for a while my rock was to do 30 cold calls, and I would only get one or two and
like
tell
3
or 4
quarters.
Tell everybody how stupid it was.
Yeah, Matthew's least favorite thing in the world is cold calling.
And we have, obviously, some of you came to us through an email list, so we're constantly emailing news. We're putting together a property manager newsletter. Mm-hmm. So the point is to just have relationships, and you'd never know when someone's going to sell, but when they do sell, it feels like it goes from interested, and then it's like, bam, something happens. Something is the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they have to sell, or they're ready to sell. Yeah. One guy we bought from, in fact, it was the first guy we bought from, his wife told him, you better sell that business because we're going to go on a cruise for, I think it went on a cruise for 6 months or something. It was a long time. So you just never know when someone's going to sell.
Yep. That's how we try to position it. We want to be the phone call. And so I think if you're a buyer, you want the relationship where they think about you. And so that's what all that we're talking about is brand familiarity, name familiarity. Like when something comes up, who are they going to call? And you want to be the one.
Want to be the first one.
That's up.
All right. A second is step 2 we're going to talk about is the initial meeting. Mm-hmm. Everything else is kind of like built up to having this conversation. And so you and I have actually a lot of these conversations. I think we had in the 40s or 50s in the last 6 months. So we're having a lot of these conversations. And really it is anything from somebody who, hey, I just want to find out what y'all are doing, all the way to, I really want to sell my business.
Mm-hmm. We had some guy position that he was interested in selling, but he was actually trying to sell us. Yeah. So you get a little bit of that too.
That's the famous bait and switch.
It is. Yeah. So you get some of that.
We even had a guy that said he was interested in selling when he dies. And so he's basically putting together his hey, if I get hit by a bus,
Call these
for his
people.
wife, call these people.
I love that. I think
it makes a lot of sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a little bit morbid to think about,
Yeah.
but I appreciate it. He was like, my wife would have no idea what to do, and just because it's a different world, and so like I want to put a playbook together, and so we're like, great, like let's have the conversation, just kind of get to know each other.
I've actually really signed up to get all the obituaries in his area emailed to me on a daily basis. I'm just kidding. He's probably out there listening to this right now. All right, so when you're having this initial discussion, I mean, part of it's just rapport building. Somebody is always a little nervous. They're always like, hey, can I trust these people? Some people aren't so nervous because they've listened to us on the podcast, but if they're coming to us from a letter or from an email reach out, they're always a little nervous. Talk to the audience about like just the information exchange that happens at step one.
A lot of it is, building rapport, like getting to know each other. And so we'll kind of go through the background, how they got into the business. From our side, we're looking at either how do we get to a quick no? And so we're looking for things that, hey, we're not going to be a good fit for this because we don't want to waste sellers' times. And so that would be like one part of it. And so we're trying to understand your business. How long have you been in the business? What does your business look like as a full third-party manager? Do you own all the assets? Is it mobile home? Is it commercial? There's a lot of variations of property management. And so we kind of walk through what their story is, how they got into the business, what they're looking to do. Then we got a list of questions that we kind of go through to help us understand. I'd like to get to a quick no or be able to point them in the direction of, hey, we're not a candidate now. If like these things were different, we may be interested in buying. And then we give them the opportunity to ask us questions about Evernest and how to, understand the process. And we'll walk them through what the process would look like.
And do you suggest someone get a non-disclosure agreement for this initial call?
We generally don't. And so after the call, if, we're both interested in moving forward, we'll send over a list of documents. And that's when we get an NDA. We're asking stuff like, how many units do you have? Do you have how many units to your top 5 clients? Like, is there a lot of client concentration? So asking stuff that like you can figure out on the internet. And so there's not a lot of, we're not asking questions, I think, that would require that.
I think of it as almost like a conversation that might normally happen at a NARPM convention or at a property managers conference. Hey, these are the types of things when you're exchanging information with somebody. Hey, it's for context, so I know where your advice is coming from. Gray, how many properties do you manage? What software do you use? How many, who are your biggest owners?
How big is your team?
Yeah.
Those types of things.
These are just like conversations that you're already having with people. So I'm with you. I don't feel like you need a non-disclosure agreement right off the bat.
Yeah. I might, if somebody wasn't willing to have any conversation without an NDA, I don't know if I would move forward. It would be like a red flag. I've had enough of these where like people will generally share that information. We're not going to ask for stuff that's, what's your revenue or your profit or what are your team members' names or your biggest clients' names? Like, we're not looking to get any of that information out of that first call.
But this is also a reason you would want to, maybe if you trust somebody like us who's been buying a ton of businesses, like we wouldn't be here and still being able to buy businesses if we were going out behind somebody's back and, telling people, oh, so-and-so's ready to sell their business.
Yeah.
Like that's just, that confidentiality, even though we don't have a non-disclosure agreement, there's a certain like professional confidentiality that happens when people call us. So, I have heard of people that will have these conversations and then maybe their teams get a phone call and somehow all of a sudden their team knows because this person is trying to hire somebody. So there may be a situation where you would want to sign a non-disclosure agreement. But if you're worried, honestly, about somebody jumping in and you're, stealing your team if they don't sign an NDA, then you probably don't want them to buy your business anyways.
Yeah, and it's hard to know that beforehand. And so I think you can share very general, high-level information. I mean, if your team's faces are on the website, they may be able to do that anyways. But I agree. I don't think you would need it.
And so if you're a seller, what type of information for this call do you need to be ready to have at your fingertips?
It's most of the stuff off the top of your head. Like you mentioned a couple of them. We will ask about the team and unit count, software. We may ask like, occupancy. I've gotten on some calls and they're at 25% occupancy, which is a much different business than 92%. But mostly like the businesses, it's information you know off the top of your head. So I wouldn't say coming in prepared. What I would think about is, why are you reaching out? And so a lot of this is like they're responding to an outbound effort, whether it's a phone call or an email or we met in person, but thinking through like, why do you want to sell? And so we end up talking about that at least at some point in the call is, okay, if you sold, like what would you go do? And that tells me a little bit, like if people really think about that, if somebody is sick and there's like a reason, like it's very clear that they may be ready to sell and like we can move pretty fast. If they haven't thought about it or it's 5 years out, like they may be less serious. And so I kind of read into that question. So that would be the only thing that, is not kind of standard business information that comes to mind.
And I always think through the lens of Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett's, yes, no, or too hard. Mm-hmm. We kind of have like 3 buckets that we put in. We can have a conversation with you and get off that. We've had enough of these where we're like, that is definitely a business we want to buy. Yeah. Hey, it's in a market we like. There's not a bunch of units per owner. They're, it's just like a very good business for what we're looking for. The seller wants to get out of the business.
Only single family, not a lot of investors and low client concentration, all those things.
And then the no's are pretty obvious too. Mm-hmm. Maybe the seller has 60% of the units, right? And we just don't buy the seller's units. We've just had a lot of problems with that in the past. The seller is always used to having all the control, and then they give up all the control, and all of a sudden, Evernest doesn't do as good of a job in their mind as they did. But there's also the maybe, right? Talk about the kind of like the in the middle deals where, hey, it's not like right down the middle. It's not a hard no, but we're probably going to have to, what are the things that could be the maybe where you may have to solve with terms?
Solving with terms, yeah. And there's a lot of businesses that like fit in that middle category.
I would say they mostly do, right?
Yeah.
These smaller businesses mostly have some hair on it, whether they manage an HOA, they have one client that makes up 25% of their units.
Yeah, or they're just structurally different than our business, where there's one coming to mind, and each PM, like the boutique style, like they do everything soup to nuts for 50 owners, and it's a white glove service. And that's just different than how we operate. We've seen challenges trying to integrate those. And then I think the other challenging part is like, we're trying to integrate that into our business, and like we may have issues in a market. So it might be a perfect business, but like the market is, doesn't have the right leader in place, and so just a lot of kind of complex challenges. I'd say the biggest ones that we solve with terms are client concentration. That's probably like the single biggest one that we solve with terms. And when we say client concentration, this is a few clients own a majority of the units. And so if you have 300 unit property management company and you've got 5 owners that make up 150 of those, like that's pretty risky to us.
And what would you say kind of like is the line where the red flag starts to happen for us?
It's probably if anyone owns, I like to see it less than 10.
Yeah, that's the number. I said like 10 to 15.
Yeah, 10 to 15. Any single client and then like all 5 together. Like if they own less than 7%, 5%, like that's a really diversified business because a lot of clients are going to have one home. There's just less risk that we buy that, they're not happy for whatever reason, or they sell. Like we bought a deal a couple months ago and there was a 10-house owner. It's a smaller deal, 100 units. 10-house owner. The previous seller didn't know. We didn't know. They just up and sell. And it's like, we just paid for that. And so like you put 5 or 6 of those together and it gets pretty kind of scary to think about buying that business.
I'm just finding out about this now. So maybe we should hit pause and, all right. We're going to put a bow again on step 2. We're going to move on to step 3 here. So we're going to talk about, let's say we've, this business falls into the yes category or the hey maybe category. We're going to ask for more information.
Yep.
And we've sent a million of these emails, but the first thing we are going to do is send a non-disclosure agreement, sometimes called an NDA. And our non-disclosure agreement basically just says what?
That we're going to keep this information confidential. We're not going to share it with parties. We're not going to share it with anybody, limited people internally. And so we're just, whatever information you share with us is going to stay with us.
And what information, like let's say we have a deal. Evernest has a deal. Like, who at Evernest knows that we're working on something?
4 people or less, and most of them sit in Birmingham here.
Yeah.
And
so not a lot of people.
It's a very, and we've got 500 team members.
we're not announcing it at an Ask Anything on Friday. We keep it in a very tight circle
until it's like fully closed. Now we'll get into it later. Once we're under LOI, that loosens up a little bit, but early on, we really want to respect sellers' privacy. I mean, you'll have these conversations with sellers, the intro call. They'll be in their car. They'll be like using a Gmail account. Like, owners understand, like, they don't want their team to know, because that can the team might quit if they're like,
it puts
the owner's
doubt in
gonna
their
sell.
head.
Yeah. So we treat this very seriously, and I think anybody with an NDA should do this. But in that, so we send over the NDA. We need a few pieces of information. It's actually pretty simple to like get to a valuation. And that's generally like, we need your P&L. And so by month, over the past 12 months, like, what does the business produce from a revenue standpoint? We need a list of all the properties and all the fees that come with them. Now, some sellers are not comfortable sharing the exact addresses. That's great. We generally don't need those. And so you can rename those, and we can get 1 through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
But it is important for us, because we are so focused on units per owners and client concentration. You don't have to say who the client is, but we want to know if it's the same client.
Correct. Yeah. And so you can end up not sharing a lot. The rent roll, we want the lease agreement template, the management agreement template, and then the org chart. And so those kind of 5 things: the P&L, what properties do you manage, how many owners do you have, what does your management agreement say, and then what does your team look like? And with that, we generally have enough information to either come back with follow-ups if there's things we have questions on. That's enough at a high level to let us know, like, are we interested, and what generally would price and terms look like?
So I'll tell you a funny story. I was on the phone with a potential capital provider the other day, and I just cut right to the chase and said, hey, here are the reasons you wouldn't invest in Evernest. And just kind of like hammered them out there for them. And they loved it. They were like, golly, nobody's ever done that for me. If you're a seller, how important is it for you to go ahead and get some of that bad news out there?
Well, as a buyer, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah.
That does not always happen. And so you do get some surprises, and we've had some surprises after the fact.
Oh, yeah.
I think it helped for me and you. I think that would help us to build trust. And it depends on what the information is, but if it's something that's either going to blow up the deal that you're going to have to certify in the final agreement that you don't have, you should get that out ahead early, because it's easier to work through on the front end if you bring that up and we can figure out a way to work together, versus it's the 11th hour and I find out something and I feel like you've misled us. Like, it's tougher relationally to recover from that, but also there might not be enough time to kind of recover from it.
I think that's absolutely right. I also think if you're a seller and you think about the psychology of a buyer, when we get one on the line, or we're excited about one, you always don't want to make somebody not excited. I mean, that's the seller. It's like, man, they're excited. I don't want to dampen their excitement. But the truth is, that information earlier is better than later, because when I think about getting it earlier, I can always overcome it in my mind, right? Versus at the last minute, it may be the straw that breaks that camel's back that says, hey, we're out of this. You kind of withheld this information from us. This is really important information to us. Versus upfront, similar to what you said earlier, builds a lot of trust. And I can say, well, what would have to be true for me to buy a business that, does this? We've bought businesses with underfunded trust accounts before. You may know a client is leaving. That's a huge portion of the business. All of these things are super important to just push out front.
Yeah, we can. And the reality is, if that kills the deal, it probably would have killed it later, and you save yourself a bunch of time.
A ton of calories for sure.
Yeah.
When you think about the diligence process, kind of the initial kind of data information that we get, how does property management software change this in recent history? Does it make it easier? Do we look for people in certain property management softwares? How should somebody think about that?
So we still run AppFolio today. A lot of our property accounting is on AppFolio. It's the integration is easier if it's on AppFolio, but we're not going to exclude a business. We're probably not going to pay more if they're on AppFolio is the reality of it. All this information is pretty easy to get down from the system. I think what would change on technology is just how you run your business. And it's like probably technology outside of the PMA. So a little different than what you were asking, but it gets into like, how does your business run? What softwares do you use? What contracts do you have? What are your owners expecting? What are your residents expecting? Like that plays more into it. So think about like how operationally the business fits in. But most of the sellers we bought have been either AppFolio or PropertyWare. I think those are probably the two most common. Probably 75% have been on AppFolio. That's not going to probably change the price.
And then also talk about, a lot of sellers are very worried about their teams. Mm-hmm. Talk about how we view the team as we're getting this information and how we think about, do we have a position for them? How should they think about their teams as they're going through this process?
Yeah, this is a big question that comes up. I've had conversations with sellers where they say, like, I'm not even interested in having a conversation unless you can guarantee that everybody has a job. I've had other people that say, totally understand. Y'all do what you need to do with the team. If they have a job, great. If not, I understand it. So you get sellers that, there's legacy and relationships kind of built in this. So I understand that. The way that we approach it and kind of from the beginning on the first call that generally comes up when we ask about the team is this is a people business and great people are hard to find. We have a lot of good team members that have come through acquisitions and we're very happy to have them on the team. But their job is probably going to change, and I can't promise that we've got a seat for everybody. And so the way that we approach it is whenever the seller is comfortable with us talking with the team, we'll kind of run them through and what the open positions are, and if they're interested in it, and if we think that there would be a good fit. So there's almost like a pseudo interview process the first kind of 1 to 2 weeks of the business. The thing is, and I mentioned it, their job change. Like if we're rolling a business into our Atlanta market, that's going to look a lot different than if this is a new market. And so we can't guarantee from day one, but we do tell them like there's a pretty good chance that not every team member is going to have a job. And so we try to get that out early so we can communicate, and that can, like, similar to what we just talked about, like that can be in the seller's mind.
And describe the difference. Like when I think about some of our competitors that are buying businesses, there are competitors that will literally buy the business and leave it running standalone. Yep. So your team basically stays.
Yeah.
Versus us, we integrate it into what we're doing. So everybody at Evernest is running the same thing, but we look for sellers that want to leave. That last one, the seller has to hang on for a couple of years. So talk about too, like a lot of it when you're selling is like your own personal strategy, right?
Yeah, it is. Like, where are you ready to be done? Because if so, like we would be a great buyer. If you want to take some chips off the table, but you still enjoy working in the business, like there are other buyers who like they need an operator in place. And so like we may pay different things just because we're looking at different strategies. And so it comes down to, I think there's buyers for either case of those or either camp. But for us, because we run our brand and our playbook and our software, like there may be duplication in accounting, for example. Like if we have centralized accounting, like if you've got an in-office accountant, like we might not have a role, but they could be really good in a different role that we have today. So I think that's the benefit that we at least offer is we've got a marketing team. We're sitting in a podcast studio. Like we also give team members opportunities in other roles if they want it. That's pretty exciting. And it's just different than a smaller PM company that has 300 units.
Give some examples of people who came via acquisition and what they're doing now.
So we had an acquisition in Chattanooga, and he came on and he was kind of leading maintenance for that acquisition. He then ran Chattanooga for us, and today he's over all of our internal technicians. We've got our one of our regionals. She came through an acquisition in Colorado, and I can't remember what her job was, but it was maybe an assistant property manager. And she just worked her way up.
And now she's running. She's one of our 4 regionals.
One of our 4 regionals, yeah. And so she's over a huge chunk of the business. And so there's a lot of team. There's probably 5 or 6 other ones I'm not thinking of right now that.
Point being,
are doing a lot of stuff.
We've had some success with that.
Yeah,
for sure.
We have. Yeah.
And then the last thing before we put a bow on this section is why don't we give some the people, some inside baseball on the investment committee. What does that look like? We get all this information, we put it into a form, and tell everybody what it looks like on our end.
Yes, it's Google Sheets, not a form.
Okay, it's a Google Sheet.
So we've got it's like an investment committee in air quotes, but there's 3 or 4 of us, and so when I get this information from a seller, we're putting it in. We've got ways that we value the business. We'll talk about that here in a second. But I'm trying to look at, hey, what is the P&L telling us, and how many units are there, and what is their revenue mix? How much is coming from maintenance? How much is coming from property management?
Said another way, this is what their P&L looks like today.
Yep.
But this is what their P&L looks like on the Evernest system.
Yep. On the Everest system, we have captive insurance, and so there's a different revenue stream, and so we'll kind of compare and contrast those, and then we're looking at the revenue multiple, and so we'll put all that together, and then we'll also kind of write up a narrative about how the company started, what are the things that we love about it, what lines up great with our playbook, and then what are the challenges. Every deal has challenges. Every deal has a little bit of hair, and we've got to sit there and think through, okay, 1, do we like this business? 2, is it in the right market? Do we have the right local teams to integrate this? And 3, how are we going to overcome these challenges with the business? All that kind of leads to either a yes or a no, and then there's valuation conversations.
Cool. Perfect segue.
Yep.
Into step 4, valuation and initial negotiation.
This is what everybody's been waiting for.
This is why people are listening. The first question people want to know is, how do you value my business? Mm-hmm. And that would be the first question I would want to know if I was calling us too, right? So talk about, there's a bunch of ways to value businesses. Mm-hmm. There's some multiple of EBITDA. There's some multiple of revenue. There's like some multiple of profit. Mm-hmm. There's just a bunch of different ways to do it. Talk about how we think about business valuation.
So the way that we think about it is a multiple of revenue.
Why?
Because a lot of these businesses, you might also hear the term seller's discretionary earnings, or SDE. A lot of small businesses, it's hard to tell really what is profit and what is not, because the owner might take draws, the owner might have cars and insurance or family members. Like, you see a bunch of wacky stuff in these like P&Ls. And so we care a little bit less about what the profit that you were generating today, because of all those things. It's hard to get to like what reality is. What we do know is, in a market that we know what the top line revenue is, and then we know our cost structures. We know what our software costs are, our office costs are, our people costs are. And so we really know kind of the cost side of it. The missing gap is the revenue and what you have there. And so, opposed to trying to get to a multiple and trying to work with you, hey, what are seller add backs? What needs to be removed from this? Getting to an adjusted EBITDA. It's far easier just to go on a revenue multiple, because generally revenue, you don't have to change it.
Yeah. The way I always think about it too is like SDE and multiple of EBITDA, you just get into arguing over the stuff that really doesn't matter. Yeah. And the truth is, we can get to a valuation just based on revenue. And it's kind of like hard to argue about revenue.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue, oh, well, this revenue does count or this revenue doesn't count. But and what revenue does count for us?
So we are looking at the property management fees. And so think management fees, leasing fees, any resident side fees. So if you have resident benefits package, if you charge late fees, so all of those kind of standard fees. And then it depends on, if you have a maintenance markup, it would be in there. And then maintenance is kind of like a sometimes we'll pay for that, just because it looks different everywhere. Some people have a maintenance tech, and other people have a completely separate maintenance company that they want to sell. And so we definitely look at all the PM revenue, and we try to see kind of holistically, because we want to be very fair in what we're paying, because if the PM company goes away, their maintenance revenue goes away as well. And so, but we're not always in a position of wanting to buy their entire maintenance business, especially if it services other people. And so the PM revenue is generally what we're looking at there.
And so we sit there, we have this IC committee, and then we come up with an offer. Mm-hmm. We actually come up, and one of the things that there's kind of like in an offer, there's like price and terms. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we're pretty good at is we want to give the seller options, right? We don't come in and say, hey, this is how we do it. We typically will give them 2 or 3 options and let them pick which one works best for them.
I just was thinking on the revenue side, we're also looking at like what's reoccurring. And so a lot of PM companies will have a brokerage associated with it. We do not generally pay for brokerage revenue just because we're trying to think what is going to recur once we buy this, because we're buying the future cash flows of this. And so I've seen some sellers, they make a ton of money, buying and selling for their clients, but there's no guarantee that we're going to do that. And so we generally will exclude the brokerage revenue.
Right.
And so, you were talking about, we give them options.
Yeah. We were just talking about like, when you think about an offer, we typically will give someone 2 or 3 options versus hey, it's kind of a take it or leave it offer.
Yeah. And I think so there's a bunch of different levers when you think about valuation. I was talking about this with somebody the other day. When you look at buying real estate, there's a few levers, but generally it's price because, unless you kind of get in the world of seller finance. But when you start to talk about buying a business, there's a lot of different levers you can pull. The timing is a lever, how much down, all cash. If the seller is seller financing, like what are the terms on that? Is that a 3-year note? Is that a 10-year note? Is it amortizing? Is it not amortizing? And so because there's so many different levers, like we're generally okay with 3 or 4 of those. And it's what's important to the seller because we're trying to communicate, hey, we're going to be partners here and we want to find the solution that works for you. And so through my conversations with the sellers, understanding what's important to them, we can put together a couple options that work for us as a buyer, but also help to accomplish what the seller's looking for.
In a 2022, 2021 world where we were competing for a lot of these businesses, we were willing to offer an all cash deal.
Yep.
I don't think we're going to do that anymore. But I also think about like risk. Like when I think about terms, I think about who is taking on the most risk, right? If the buyer is taking on the most risk, when we would write checks for these businesses, we would take on more of the risk, but we would offer a discounted all cash offer. But we were dealing with the risk of attrition. We were having to find our own financing and come up with the capital. If the seller is willing to participate in some of that risk, right? Whether it's through some sort of attrition clause or clawback, whether it's seller financing a portion of it, if they're willing to take on some of the risk, then we can ultimately pay them more money.
Yep. There's a huge correlation to that. And so if you just start whichever way you kind of go, whoever's taking more risk, like that should be accounted for in the sales price. And like you're talking about a bunch of terms, like terms really dictate the deal. And so don't get anchored to what is the sales price that I'm going to tell my buddies or, tell whoever, my family, like that I sold it for. That's like a good starting point, but it really comes into details and like how and when I'm going to get paid, because you may, have a huge headline number, but you don't get paid for 15 years. Is that really like what you want?
I used to have a whole partner that would say, you tell me the price, I'll give you the terms. And so no matter what price, we can figure out some terms that come up with it.
Yep. Sellers generally want both price and terms. That doesn't always work. And so there's kind of there's not a ton of like back and forth negotiation. There is some on finer points of it, but I think generally we can, if the seller is ready to sell and there's some trust there, we can pretty quickly find alignment on these.
And talk about like as a seller, hiring an advisor, whether that's a transaction attorney or a business broker. How should they think about hiring an advisor?
They've got to have experience in this industry. And so there's like a lot of business brokers that sell a ton of different types of businesses, and you'll get probably good advice. So I would recommend like you should talk to somebody, but you want somebody in this industry who knows, property management businesses. Like that's where you're going to get the best advice. Your job as a seller should be to maximize your sales price and what you get from a sales price and a term standpoint. So would definitely recommend like reaching out to somebody as long as they're credible and they know what they're talking about. I've also seen it blow up deals just because there's a third party that's kind of in the middle and they don't understand. And it's like, it kind of removes the trust factor. And then you're just debating on like each side's facts. And it's kind of hard to get a deal done sometimes if the wrong person gets in the middle of it.
I totally agree. I love it when someone has a transaction attorney that's done a lot of transactions. My advice would be don't go hire the broker or somebody that's getting paid some percentage of the closed sale, hire a great transaction attorney. And this transaction attorney should not be the business attorney that you've been working with. It probably should be someone who only does transactions for a living.
Yep.
What they'll do is they go through these all the time. They understand what is market, what is not market. They're just going to do a great job of like pushing things along, and their goal is to get a deal done.
Yep. Because the purchase and sale agreement is like it's a big, long document. And so when you say like things are market, it's not just what is the multiple of revenue that I'm getting or how much down, how much seller finance. It's like there are terms and clauses in here that like protect both the buyer and the seller, but like you only sell your business once. And so you need somebody good advising you along the way, especially in those components.
It's okay to spend a little extra money getting the right advice.
Yep.
We may cut this, but I'll ask the question anyways. Can you share an example of a negotiation where creative terms like earnouts help bridge a valuation gap?
I mean, the only one that comes to mind is we were using SBA debt to close a deal at the end of the year, which if you're doing that, it's a bad idea. Like, it's probably not going to close at the end of the year.
There's not a lot of government workers approving SBA deals at the end of the year.
That one still gives us heartburn. But it bled into the new year, and the seller, the SBA has certain requirements about how much the seller can seller finance and put down, and so now we have to cut this. I'm trying to like even remember the deals. Like, but he ended up like at the last minute having to do a huge seller note that was structured in a different way.
I think we paid him off
recently.
Yeah. Well, not super recently, but I think that worked out for him.
Okay, good for him.
We refinanced a bunch of debt a few years ago, and I think he got paid off.
Good. Okay. Well, good for him, because that helped.
But at the 11th hour, the SBA wouldn't allow us to do it the way we had previously done it, and he had to essentially take on a bigger seller note.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. And so it was literally, that's the only way that deal would have gotten done. And so we appreciated the seller's trust in doing that. And
he wasn't happy about it.
He wasn't. That was really stressful. But maybe he's happy now once the money's in.
Since he's got all that cash.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's say, and these are kind of a little bit the same. Like, we actually send over offers inside a letter of intent, also called an LOI. So we broke it down into two individual steps, but let's say you've kind of like agreed on a price and terms, and then there's essentially a letter that's, I think of it as like almost like going from and I don't know what the kids call it today, but you kind of like have this person that you like to being a official boyfriend and girlfriend.
You define the relationship.
You define the relationship.
I don't know if that's what they call it.
Yeah. I think that was your age group.
Yeah.
But, and so this letter of intent is a non-binding, nobody's really like committed to anything, but it's essentially us putting our agreement down on paper. Right. And so talk about the LOI or the letter of intent.
It's a pretty simple 3 or 4 page document that says, hey, we're willing to pay this amount for this many units. These are the terms. This is how much down if there's seller finance. So it walks through that. It talks about when the closing date would be, and so a proposed closing date. And it also talks about access to information if we do go under contract. And so that's a big part kind of leading into our actual diligence, because oftentimes we're putting this LOI out there after only getting those 5 pieces of information, the P&L, property list. And so we're saying, assuming that everything's true, we got to figure out more. This is what we'd be willing to pay. And so it talks about access to, your software, and if we're going to talk to your team. And so all of those things are kind of fleshed out in the LOI. And then there is an exclusivity clause in there, because we're going to spend resources, attorney resources, internal team resources, and kind of putting this deal together. And we want to make sure there's a good faith effort on both sides, that the seller doesn't sign 6 LOIs and it's just kind of, shopping around. And so you generally don't get pushback on that, because most sellers that sign the LOI are pretty engaged.
And for sellers that are like getting a bunch of LOIs, and this happens in a process, when sellers running a process, they may get multiple LOIs incoming, right?
Yep.
Essentially, they'll feel more like offers. How do you evaluate the LOI? Like if you're a seller, how do you evaluate the LOI from their standpoint?
So one, we talked about getting people that, so maybe that transaction attorney that's probably not them, but there's probably somebody else who can help you to think through this. I would try to line up like, okay, what is the price for all of these? What is the amount down? How much risk am I taking with these? And so you got to kind of compare and contrast because it ultimately is what's important to you. Like that at the end of the day is you got to figure out like what makes most sense for you. And is that closing in 30 days? Because that might be the lowest priced offer, but if that solves your needs. And so I would just kind of lay all of them out and get all the terms kind of like mapped out in the spreadsheet and then start walking through, okay, this is off the table for this reason. This is off the table for this reason.
I think there's also some intangibles too, right? Like when you think about the certainty to close, that's not something that doesn't
come up in the
LOI, but it is certainly very important. How often has this company bought? If somebody's buying a business for the first time, I would say they're less likely to close than somebody who's buying it for the 31st time, right? And so making sure that there's also some intangible pieces when you think about.
And that goes back to interviewing kind of, these buyers. Like if you are talking and having a bunch of these conversations, like ask them, how many LOIs have you gone under and not closed? How many deals have you had to extend? Like understanding their experience, I think will kind of get you there. But yeah, that's not a section on the LOI as I promise to close this business because you're going forth and they might not be able to get financing or they might find something that they don't like. And so really there's a bunch of different factors and price and amount down are just kind of two of them. There's a lot of the other things that are important.
And I think too, one of the critical pieces of this is to continue the momentum of the deal.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've seen to kill a deal is just time. When things take forever, like if you're a seller and you're taking forever to get us information, like that creates that kind of like disrupts our momentum. And we start to think, oh, well, there's probably a reason the seller's not getting us information. Or if you're a buyer and you're not getting back to a seller, there's like, you're losing momentum there. And time kills deals. So you want to make sure this ought to feel like a snowball that's growing and growing and growing as we're going through it. And I'm just, as I'm saying this, I've got this anxiety because I feel like there's people that are probably waiting on stuff from us. But the truth is the reality. So, all right. So we're going to, again, put a bow. I keep using that on letter of intent. And then we're going to talk about once someone signs a letter of intent, and both groups sign this letter of intent. The next step is a deep dive into diligence. And also the buyer, if they're having to set up financing, they're going to have to do that during this process. So talk about some things. Let's just talk about the diligence for 1 second.
Yeah.
Like what are some things that buyers are looking for in the deep dive diligence process?
So this is when the fun starts, and this is when more people on our team get involved.
And this is where I get out because I'm not a details person. Now y'all are doing it, and I'm trying to find somebody else.
So I think you're doing probably three things simultaneously. The first bit is verifying the information that the seller said is true, verifying what's in the property management software, and so you're starting to like look at the business, what homes are on the market, you go through 100 questions kind of asking that. The second part we're starting to think is, okay, we're preparing for integration. So once we go into LOI, our team start thinking about it. We start planning for integration date. How are we going to get homes on the market? How are we going to merge the software? So there's like a whole work stream of getting the information out, who is going to do what. And so there's a lot of planning that goes into that.
This is the time where we start circling in a broader team, right? Like up until this point, it's probably only been 4 or 5 people plus our attorneys. And then once we get a commitment via an LOI, we start to circle in, for instance, like you talked about leasing homes. We would circle in our head of leasing to say, hey, we have a business in, XYZ city, and they have 50 houses on the market. Like, what's it going to take for you to do this lift?
Yep. And so you talked about momentum earlier. Like we go into this once we're under LOI, like we are working towards, hey, how do we build momentum to close? because we don't want to be caught flat-footed by anything. So from really day one, we're starting to get information out of the system. We're pulling down listing photos. So like we're ready to go live on day one. And so that's when we bring in, think like a SWAT team. So like one person for maintenance and leasing and field ops. And so that whole group gets together and we meet 3 times a week, and we're getting ready. We build out a calendar. We share it with the seller and we say, hey, this is what the integration plan is. This is what the communication plan is to the clients. And so we're kind of working on that work stream. And then the third side is, getting the contract and if there's financing going on. So it's like how you get the deal done and working on documents. And so it's those kind of like 3 work streams that happen in this diligence period.
And this is probably the time when the seller feels the most pressure because we're asking for information. I think Curran in the past or our team in the past has just gotten login information into their management software. That's an easy way for us to pull
generally the
data.
easiest way. Yeah.
But talk about from the seller side how you can facilitate due diligence without disrupting your daily operations. I mean, in some cases, the sellers don't even want their employees to know yet.
Yeah, most sellers do not want their team to know, and we are very cautious of that and respectful of that. And so we will oftentimes get a login, and we'll just create a dummy Gmail account because. Yeah, so we'll get information, we'll get in the system, we're cognizant of that, and we can generally kind of navigate that, getting access to the system. The other component is there is like a blackout period where we've got to pause transactions in the system while we're merging, and so it does take a little bit of work from the seller side to like navigate the internal communication with their team of why the system may be down, and us still getting the job done. And so there's a little bit of that kind of song and dance that the seller has to play while we're going through this. But
and just so they know, that's typically really close to closing.
It is, yeah.
We're still a little bit away from that, but you're right. Like by that point, generally most sellers have told their teams if we're in the blackout period, but there are some that we show up the day after and
they want money in the account
Yeah.
until their team knows.
And if you're a buyer, talk about some of the ways to finance some of these businesses. We've done everything from SBA to seller finance.
Yeah. All cash if you got it. And if you can account for the risk and the price is an easy way to quickly get a deal done. And then you can go, SBA has a lot of programs, but there's just a lot of questions and forms, and it takes a long time to push it through.
So I actually have some advice on that, and please pick up right after this. But I think an SBA is a great way. We've used it to buy businesses really early in the Evernest arc, and I think you can buy up to $5 million of businesses with it. The critical piece here is to get somebody that understands the SBA process, and there's 2 ways to do that. One is to go to a big bank that has an SBA department, and the SBA sometimes, this is probably the most ideal if you have a good relationship there, because the SBA department has the ability to internally approve SBA. So SBA has basically handed them the keys and said, hey, we're going to you've done this enough, you're big enough, you don't have to have the SBA approve it. We're going to let you approve it, and then we're going to insure it. And what people need to know is the SBA is not giving money to the bank. The bank, it's essentially insuring the loan to the bank. So the bank gives us the money, and then the SBA insures that in the event we default. So go to a bank that has an SBA department that does not need to get a SBA approval. The other way is if you go to a small bank, and many of our folks out there, this is the way I was. You don't go to a big bank, you go to a small bank where your deposits mean more, you have a relationship, you can get somebody on the phone. And what I've learned is they all have an SBA department, but they've got to go to the SBA to get it approved. And what I have found is it is worth hiring what's called a packager. So they will package the loan the way the SBA wants to. These small community banks are not doing SBA loans that often. And they will package it on their behalf, and you have to pay this packager $2,000 or $3,000, but it's well worth it. Like the brain damage of it, and so those are like everybody hears how much work the SBA is, and that is true. But having somebody that knows how to navigate the SBA super important. So sorry, that was a quick aside.
No, that's like really good information. It's a good way to get started. I'd say with that, like you do personally guarantee it. And so I think that's a big part of SBA debt. And then there's certain limits just in terms of how you can finance them. So like how much the seller can put down, how much capital you have to put down. But I think you can come to the table with like 10%, as little as 10% down. So it is a good way to get started or to like finance growth in the business. Those were good tips. And then, seller financing is probably the other easiest way, where instead of going to a bank and getting a loan and then paying off the seller becomes the bank, and you can negotiate the terms with them. You can pay them monthly, you can pay them annually, you can pay them interest, it can be amortizing. It's very flexible. It's whatever you agree upon. And so we have used and use a combination of all of those.
The thing that's important for you to know about, if you've never gone to a bank and asked them to help finance one of these businesses are great cash flow businesses. They just don't have a ton of assets. And so when I think about, if you quit paying, the bank's got to look at it like this. Like, if Matthew quits paying, what am I going to go get? That's the reason they like the SBA, because they don't have to go get anything. The SBA just pays them back, or some percentage of it back.
It's not like a car note where you can just go repo the car.
You go get the car.
Like, there's not hard assets. And so like lenders will tell you like, hey, it's kind of blue sky. Like, there's contracts, but I can't just take over the contracts and start getting, like, you've got to service the property management agreement.
Somebody has to run the business.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so that's why it's so hard just to go straight to a bank, unless you just have an amazing relationship or have a huge deposit relationship with them and get a loan. What are some surprises that you've encountered during due diligence? I'll jump in here. I think one of the first things is how often we find underfunded trust accounts. What we have found is the culprit of this, and shame on the property management softwares, but mostly owner credits. When people give owner credits, they don't account for the cash correctly, and they're not doing it maliciously. They're just saying, "Hey, I'm giving you a credit back," and in their mind, it may count against future cash, or they think the property management software reconciles it in the back end. It does not. You've got to physically move the cash back into the account, and so we found hundreds of thousands of dollars in underfunded trust accounts from this.
Yeah. I wouldn't, maybe not most, but a lot have been underfunded, and the sellers had no idea, and it wasn't malicious, but it's part of the terms of the agreement.
I think it may be a third.
You think?
I think it could be as many as a third. This also should not be a reason you wouldn't go ahead and sell too, because we can basically true up the underfunded trust accounts at closing, so that all the owners are made whole. Yeah.
There's not a ton. I'm trying to think of, like, there's been no like deal killers, and property management, especially acquiring PM companies, it's just a game of solving problems. So we talked about like having information earlier. Like, every challenge we have, it's like, okay, well, just how are we going to solve it? It's just like problem solving on overload. And so there's just a bunch of small things that are not ideal that you have to figure out how to work around. So those are probably
another reason you should sell. If you care about the legacy of your business, you should sell to somebody that's done it before, because you should never sell to the first one, Matthew, when I was buying, because we made so many dumb mistakes, and lost customers as a result of that. All right, we're going to get on to step 7, which is final negotiations and purchase agreements. So we've done a deep dive. We've got the financing squared away. You're always finding something, though. And so, you've heard sometimes that people would retrade the deal, maybe based on some of the diligence stuff that they found. And this purchase agreement is kind of like the final step in the process. You've got to make sure that you fully agree. These are kind of the soup to nuts that are going to get signed. So talk about the purchase agreement. Sometimes you'll hear it called the PSA.
This is where both sides have attorneys, and it's a long document with a lot of legal language, and there's an infinite number of things that you can negotiate on. And the reality of just contracts is you're saying, in the event of this, or a worst case scenario, this is how it will be handled. And so you have to go down a bunch of rabbit holes of, well, how likely is this going to happen? Or, is this not likely at all? And so there's a lot of details in there. That's why having good counsel is really important. And an attorney who's not just an attorney, because attorneys like to protect against every single risk, but it's an attorney who understands business and can help you think through what the risks are, how to mitigate them, how likely they are, and not to eliminate all risk. Because like attorneys want to eliminate risk. That's like one of the core things of their job. There's some risk in all of this. And so that would be like the general advice is just like find an attorney who has done this before and understands we can't mitigate all risk, but making you aware of like what risks are in there.
That's what I think is important. Like, hey, here's the business risk. Here's what could happen. And then let me make the decision whether I want to take on that risk or not.
Yeah. And it's like, what happens if either party would be insolvent, or what happens if there's solicitation of clients. And so you're talking through all these kind of like really worst case scenarios in every side. But generally they go pretty smoothly, but there's a few points that you'll kind of end up negotiating upon. And so just having really good counsel is important.
And this goes back and forth. I mean, we've had weeks and weeks negotiating a PSA.
This is where deals get kicked out at the PSA, because it's, back and forth and you got to be on it, and it goes to the attorney and you got to follow up. But like, this is where timelines can blow up.
And this is where, to your point, like you also get kind of tired. You've done all this work to get up to this point, and now you're still negotiating.
Yep.
And so it's the thing about buying businesses, it's not for the faint of heart. No. It takes a ton of energy. And keep in mind, while we're doing all this, you also have to run your business in the background if you're buying, or if you're selling, you also have to run your business in the background. So the business doesn't stop. You kind of like have an extra job on top of doing the business. And
the work is roughly the same, regardless of how big the business is. Like a 100-unit portfolio is roughly the same amount of work as buying a 500 or 600. Like there are more challenges at 1,000, 2,000, but like it's the same PSA that you've got to go through. There's just more properties on there. And so you end up spending a bunch of energy. So we love smaller deals and we're happy to do smaller deals. Just something to be aware of. It's like there are a lot of work.
There's this thing called decision fatigue, and the more decisions that you make in a day or the more decisions you make, the more tired you become and the worse the decisions become. And so when you think about this final step, how do you manage your emotions through this final step?
It is hard because you get to a place, and then it's the psychology of, well, are they intentionally doing this? Like, because they know that like leverage plays a part. Like nobody wants the deal to blow up at the end of the day, but I think it can be used against people. You've got to zoom out and help the seller zoom out. Like I've got to help sellers zoom out and like, hey, we're talking about a really low probability thing here. This is probably not going to happen, but if it is, again, like we want to be fair.
That's where a good transaction attorney that advises the seller, advises the buyer. If you have a good transaction attorney, they're gonna calm you down and say, "Hey, Gray, I've seen this before. Like, don't worry. Like, sleep on it. Let's talk about it tomorrow." Or, no, this is something you should really get worked up about.
That's it. Know what is important and when to stand your ground or hold firm on a point, and know what things are like. There's always a give and take. Nobody gets what they want. You both end up with a deal that you feel okay about and you feel it's fair to one another, but I've got to give some and you've got to give some as well.
One of the things we require in our agreements is a non-compete agreement. So talk about what that is, and a non-solicit.
Yeah.
Like the last thing we want to do is buy a business and then somebody to come in and take all of our customers or employees.
That has happened. And so, we do ask the sellers, we don't want you opening another property management business. And these are negotiable, but generally it's 3 years. And we'll define the radius. And so if you want to move somewhere else where Everest is not and open up another property management business, go for it. But we'll dictate where you can't. And that's just, we're buying this business. You have these relationships. It would be really risky for us not to have that in there. Most of the time, sellers want to get out of the business. They want to go do something else, cruise for 6 months or start another business. So generally, that's not a point of contention. And then the solicitation, there's just you can't go out and hire team members that, we hire, or talk to clients or talk to vendors. And so those are just protecting, from bad actors really at the end of the day.
Yeah. When we buy something, we're basically buying the future cash flows. And the last thing we want is for those cash flows to stop coming in. So we got to make sure that you don't, as the seller, don't do anything to disrupt that cash flow.
Yep.
And when I think about a non-compete, I think it's also important to realize that when we narrow it down to just the stuff we manage. So if you wanted to go manage commercial in that same city, In most cases, multifamily. That's fine.
Yeah.
We've had people go do that. If you wanted to go manage single family in another city, you could go do that. The whole point is we want to make sure these customers that we're buying from you stick with us.
One question that comes up is, can I keep the name of my business? And what we don't want is another PM or another real estate company that confuses people and it's under the same name as the seller's company. So that's generally a part of the agreement, whether we're buying the rights to that name or if for a certain period you can't use it for certain types of businesses. But I've seen some sellers, like they own 5 companies and it's all kind of a generally name. And so we're willing to work through those, but that's another thing that goes in the PSA.
All right. I'd like to get to step 8 of 9, which is closing the deal. So we're going to talk about all right, we've finally negotiated the PSA. We are here. We finally made it after now on our 8th step.
Yeah.
And this process to get to this point has taken as little as we've actually done it in a couple of weeks. We had a seller whose husband owned the business he passed away, and she came to us through a friend and said, hey, somebody's got to run this business ASAP. And so we jumped in and did this in as little as 2 weeks. But we think the reasonable time for this from start to close is more like 45 days.
Yeah, 30 to 45. We generally close at the end of the month or at the beginning of the month. And so it's plus or minus. It's pretty anticlimactic closing a deal.
Yes.
Because
I agree.
There's not this big
I kind of wanted again, celebration and big party and everybody's excited.
I was reading Shoe Dog and they settled this deal with somebody and they were talking about all these war treaties they'd write in together, and it was this big thing, and they were closing a deal and it was nothing to write home about. But because generally you're signing, you might sign the night before and then the other party kind of signs it.
I've actually signed, I work out at lunch. I've actually signed mid-run on my phone, just do, because at that point, it's amazing how many documents you sign, but you've already approved all the documents, so there's nothing to read. You don't read the whole thing.
You've read them, you've gone through them, you've approved them. It's just kind of putting your signature on there. So closing the deal is just a signing of documents, and there's wiring of funds 2 ways. You're sending us trust account money and any client funds, and then we're sending you, whatever the down payment or whatever the funds you're owed are.
And sometimes we will actually fund the trust accounts with capital, and then we'll send you the rest, and then you kind of keep everything over there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So
however, but point being, money goes.
Money.
One side
we get
another.
the client money, and then you get the money, and then that's when our team takes over. And so, kind of in between final negotiations and closing the deal, we're starting to communicate out. We're preparing for communication to go out to clients. This is a big deal for a lot of investors and property owners. Their property manager who they chose is changing, and so we are working with our integration team or our operations teams to have an email go out from the seller and an email go out from Evernest. And then we've got our teams lined up and we start reaching out to owners to get in front of them, because we want to communicate and have the chance to be able to, connect with the owners, let them know what things will be changing, what things won't be changing. And so there's all these kind of operational workflows going on in the background. That first week, our teams are really busy getting everything up to speed.
One thing that I think is interesting about us, in the past, we've tried to close the deal, kind of let everything settle down, and then do this kind of slow migration. But what we found was we're already doing 80% of the work to convert onto our systems. So something that's unique about us is when we close, we actually transfer everything into our systems. And that's kind of unique to us. But we feel like if we're going to drop a ball, we'd rather be running it the Evernest way than trying to make these systems communicate with each other, right? Run the old system plus our system, just way too confusing.
There's a lot of brands and bank accounts, and you just start thinking about the duplication when you start thinking about running a separate business. And so, we're communicating, we're migrating things into our system. We're starting to reach out to owners. We're letting residents know where to make payment because they get a new portal link. And so we're doing all of that work kind of operationally. But as the seller, once the deal is closed, you often will facilitate like our teams meeting your team. And this is when big loops start opening. And if you have team members and you're selling a business, like, do I have a job? Like all these questions start opening up. And so we're very thoughtful about that. And so we'll meet with the teams and kind of let them know what the plan is. And so the seller will be involved maybe for, the first kind of week depending on the size of the business. But after about 30 days, they're kind of out. So we'll get to that in a second. But those first 2 weeks, they're helping just facilitate. Here's the information. This is, marketing photos for this. This is the team for this. And they're kind of like pointing us in the right direction. But our teams are picking up a lot of the work.
One misconception, which you hit on earlier, is I thought you would show up at closing and you would have the buyer and the seller there. And I just had a complete misconception of the reality of what happens. Now, I have been on one recently that actually had a closing call. And that was the first time I'd ever done that, where they basically released the escrows and you had to get the attorneys to approve that everything. They held essentially the PSA and all the signatures, closing documents in escrow, and the attorneys had to actually release the documents, officially release the documents. It was pretty cool. I of course, being the idiot that I am, my attorney was supposed to answer, and I jumped in and answered, and I think I stole his thunder, but he still let me close and pay him anyways.
That's a pretty expensive call. Start looking around, all those attorneys.
It's a very expensive call. Maybe it's just one more way for them to extract an extra little bit out of us.
Yeah. But yeah, there's closing the deal happens pretty quickly. Sometimes we put the down payment in escrow. And so all those are kind of pre-negotiated, but pretty uneventful. And then it gets to after post-close.
What I think's interesting at this point is you've literally run a marathon to get to this point, and it is exhausting to get to closing. And you show up at closing, and you want it to just be, as a buyer, you want it to just be done. Now, as a seller, especially if you sell to us, it kind of is done. Your work really...
I'm kind of jealous of the sellers.
It falls off a cliff pretty quickly after closing. But for those of us that are buying businesses, it is like running a marathon. You get to the finish line, you are exhausted, you're about to throw up, and then they're like, hey, dude, you got to run all the way back to the starting line because your work has literally just begun. You just bought this business, and now you have a ton of crap you need to do to get this business integrated. So the hard work, the heavy lifting is now happening. So you go from all your energy spent to get to close, you close, and now all your energy spent on saving this asset you just bought, saving the value of the asset you just bought.
I just personally guaranteed this loan.
Yes.
I got to make sure we execute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember I was first business I bought in Nashville. It was kind of like late on a Friday. We had finally closed. The closing, sometimes there's always something that rises, and you push it back a day and you push it back a day. It's always something. But we finally closed, and I remember being at the gas station, and there were 2 or 3 people with me, and they're like, "Man, are you excited?" And I was like, "No, I just literally feel the stress of the integration now." And so you can't even, when you're buying a business, I hope I'm not, ruining somebody's day here, but you can't even enjoy buying a business because you got so much work you got to do. You just signed yourself up for so much work.
You got to have the 24-hour rule. Celebrate it for 24 hours and then get to working.
We haven't had the 24-hour rule, but
24-second rule.
Anytime you bring in the Nick Saban 24-hour rule, I'll give you credit for that.
Yep.
All right, and we are here. Step number 9. What happens post-closing and the transition and then the seller exiting? One of the things I think that's unique about us is we want the seller to leave. Like our plan is to integrate it into the Evernest business. So we look for specific sellers that are either retiring, there's sellers that are getting out of the business. There are sellers out there that want to stay involved, and we're just not the right buyer for them.
Yep.
So talk about seller post-transaction, and then kind of like the plan to implement the business.
Yep. And I hinted at some of it. I kind of got ahead of myself, but yeah, if you're a seller, we generally tell sellers, hey, please be available for 30 days. It's written in the contract. Most of the time by like week 3 and week 4, there may be like 1 or 2 questions as we're closing the books for that month that come up. But pretty quickly, like the load is lifted off of them, which is awesome. And I love that for the sellers. And like within a week or 2, like our teams are collecting rent. We're talking to residents, like things start flowing through our system. And so like the big things are just communicating with clients. Like there's a lot of change. And so we've got a communication plan that's like a 5-part email to the owners. We've got teams. We try to get every owner on the phone to start building that relationship, letting them know who to contact. And so like our teams are just, we've got a really good team. We've done this a lot. We've got a, probably 100-point kind of integration checklist. And there's maybe 50 points for the actual week of transition. So like that's when it's really important. We've got to be on it. We've got to get homes on the market. We've got to collect rent. And then things kind of slow down after a couple of weeks and you kind of get things integrated. And that's when the seller's involvement really, really steps back. And I think that's great for them. Their teams oftentimes are starting to get trained on the Everest platform and the Everest softwares, and things start to kind of hum after 2 or 3 weeks of integration.
Yeah, and I always think the first 30 days is really hard for our team, for the buyer. The transition, everything's new. You're communicating a bunch to clients and residents, and you're making sure the accounting's perfect. I think it settles down between 30 and 60, and after 60 to 90, I think it kind of falls into the rhythm, right? Yep. And what I've found is clients, when they find out that their property manager is sold, their radar goes up, and that lasts about 60 to 90 days. And as long as everything, they don't really care how the sausage is made, as long as they get their checks and everything seems okay, then they're kind of like, hey, it's business as usual. I'm going to take my focus off of it. But it's very important that we stick the landing on communication and accounting in the first 60 to 90 days.
Yep. Get the owners the money when they expected it. And I mean, there's some owners that like, they don't think about their PM. And sometimes it's 3 months later until they're like, oh, this sold. And so like there are some sellers that, you don't have to communicate with a bunch, but it's like the transition issues, or if owners have really complicated issues, like we get ahead of those, we're aware of those with the seller. And so we know exactly like which owners are having issues that we've got to work with. And so, once you go through a couple owner statement cycles and owners maybe get a couple of work orders, like things kind of fall back into that business as usual.
And when I think about the seller too, I mean, one of the big hard things about being a seller is you go from being the guy or the gal, right? The whole business revolves around you. You're super important. You make a bunch of really tough decisions. The clients need you. And you're like so ready to give that up. But post-selling, what our sellers have come back to us and said is, hey, it feels so weird not to be needed. And so one of the things that we always say is, number one, you need to make sure you're darn well ready to sell, because when you do, like the phone calls will stop happening pretty quickly. And for some people, that's like, hey, I'm all into that. Like, please. But then for other people, you don't realize how much purpose and value that creates for you to have the ability to put out fires. A lot of these people have been putting out fires for 25 plus years. And so, it's very important that that you're ready to sell. And then the second thing is you also need to make sure that you're ready to spend time doing something, fill up the time. The last thing you want on the backside of this is to just have a big void and kind of like walk around aimlessly. We've had people go on cruises. We've had people do hobbies. You spend more time with your spouse. Point is, like, you need to define what the second part of this looks like, because it's amazing how quickly you're not needed.
Yep. I listened to a podcast the other day about somebody selling their business, and they were hammering on the importance of like, have something you're running to, because there's this like post-sale depression that you can fall into if you don't have something like that. And so that's like one of the questions we asked, just like, what are you going to do?
What's next?
Yeah. And a lot of they want to get into development, or they want to start another business. Like one guy wanted to start an energy drink company. Great. You got something you're going to chase after. That's for like sellers to kind of figure out, but I think it is really important. Like have something because it feels good and the problems stop and you get the check. And then what?
Then what?
Then what?
Yeah. And if you're a buyer, like you can do this in a very, you can do, multiple of these transactions. Our suggestion, we did one year and then we added like 2 the next year. We did 17 in a 6-month period. I think that was a little too much.
It was a lot.
Point being is you can't be scared to make mistakes here, right? And you got to like stick your neck out there, do the best you can. You're going to screw it up. We have this 100-point checklist. I actually think it's bigger than that.
It's like 100-point with like 100 sub points. Maybe it's, a couple
that maybe
thousand.
the 100 top line.
Yeah.
That thing started out probably 50 long and now it's hundreds of points. So point being, you just don't, you shouldn't worry about messing this up because you're definitely going to mess it up. And we just think this is just a great way and a creative way to grow your business if you're out there doing it.
Yep. Great way to get in new markets. It is really hard. It's a lot of work, but I think we've built a bigger business because of this. And it's awesome to give sellers the opportunity to have an exit plan because not often, a couple of years ago, I would talk to people, they didn't even know that you could sell your business. And so, we've learned a bunch. It has been really hard, but I think it's been really, really rewarding.
All right. So Gray and I have walked you through the 9 steps that we use to buy a business. From the first outreach to the seller to finally that seller riding off into the sunset, whatever that means. And the thing about it is, I think as a seller, you should be so proud when you sell your business because I always tell sellers, man, it is amazing that you talk about the American dream, that you built a business that somebody will pay money for. So kudos to those of you out there that have sold a business. And kudos to those who are trying to sell their business because, the fact that people will pay money for something it truly is the American dream. So we've walked through the 9 steps of buying a property management company or selling a property management company. We've taken you from prospecting all the way through negotiating and LOIs and the PSA and to close all the way to the seller riding off into the sunset, whatever that means for the seller. And so if you want to find out more, or if you're thinking about selling or buying a property management business, you want our help, we're happy to be a resource. If you're interested in selling, we're happy to have a conversation with you about that. Hope you'll reach out to us either on LinkedIn or at podcasts@evernest.co. We're happy to have a conversation with you. These are free and simple. So Gray, any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, I hope this has been helpful. A bunch of information here. And so, we're looking forward to having a bunch of these conversations. And like Matthew said, we're happy to have these help point you in the direction if you're looking at selling now or in the next couple of years. So looking forward to talking and having some of those conversations.
All right, everybody, until next time, we hope you'll keep building, keep scaling, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Everest Property Management Show. Take care.